The night of February 8th, 1855, settled over the English countryside like a held breath, heavy with unspilled snow and a silence that felt far too deep. By dawn, the people of Devon would awaken to a sight that would shake the foundations of their quiet, candlelit world. Stretching across the frozen fields, over the roofs of thatched cottages, and through the locked gardens of country estates, a trail of strange marks scarred the freshly fallen snow. They were footprints, yet they belonged to no creature that the farmers or the vicars of the parish had ever seen carved into the earth. This was not the meandering track of a lost animal wandering in a storm. It carried the mathematical precision of a terrible, unhurried purpose. The trail defied every physical law known to the frightened men who knelt in the snow to trace its edge with trembling fingers. It did not stop for walls made of stone 14 feet high, nor for haystacks, nor for the glazed panes of hothouses where the prints appeared on the snow-covered glass as if a weightless specter had passed. In one stretch, the phantom stride crossed the wide mouth of the river Exes, picking up on the other bank as if the water had been no more than a shadow on a map. The marks ran on for over 100 miles, zigzagging from the coastal town of Exmouth up through Topsham, crossing the frozen landscapes of Totnes and Dawlish. They were spaced exactly 8.5 inches apart, a mechanical, dreadfully consistent gait that no horse, no mule, and no man could replicate over such impossible obstacles. Panic, which had been a low ember in the pre-dawn cold, now ignited into a terrified inferno that swept through the villages faster than a winter gale. The local clergy opened their heavy Bibles and pointed to the snow with shaking hands, whispering a single name that had frozen the blood of their ancestors for centuries: the devil. They declared that the Prince of Darkness himself had stalked through Devon in search of sinners, his cloven hooves searing the snow as a warning of judgment. To understand the sheer grip of this terror, you must look back at the England of 1855, a landscape lit only by whale oil lamps and the guttering glow of hearth fires. It was an era when the telegraph was still a miracle, yet the deep, ancient woods still whispered with the folklore of piskies and black dogs. The winter itself had been a beast, a prolonged iron chill that had frozen the breath on the lips of livestock and sealed the county in a flawless shroud of deep white. This was no gentle dusting. It was a crystallized memory of the air, a perfect recording surface that captured the secret movements of a single night. When the first servant girl opened her door in Topsham, she found the prince running straight up to the threshold, only to reappear behind the house, as if the thing had simply stepped through the dwelling. Men with muskets and pitchforks gathered in uneasy posses, following the trail, not like hunters, but like condemned men walking toward a fate they could not name. They tracked the marks over the frozen mud of the estuary and saw them vanish into the mouth of a drain pipe no wider than a man's arm. On the other side, the tracks resumed their relentless march, untouched by the squeeze through dark, narrow earth, as if the substance of the traveler was not flesh. They climbed the sheer vertical face of a town hall to a sheltered roof, a place where no human ladder had rested, and left their punctual signatures on the undisturbed snow above the streets. In the churchyards, the tracks circled the ancient stone crosses and the moss-covered tombstones, as if lingering in a mocking ritual dance over the graves of the faithful. Newspapers, like the Exeter Flying Post and the Plymouth Gazette, did not treat this as a simple anomaly. They printed detailed columns filled with the measured testimonies of terrified residents. The Victorians were caught in a painful schism between their burgeoning rational science and the old superstition that still clung to the smoke in their chimneys. They measured the stride, cast the tracks in plaster, and drafted precise diagrams, hoping that the cold logic of geometry might exorcise the demon from the data. One witness described a deep, oppressive silence that hung over the fields where the footprints lay, as if the very birds had been choked by an invisible hand. Dogs in the farmsteads, the mastiffs and the sheepdogs, who would tear a wolf apart, spent the night whimpering under hay carts, refusing to step outside. The evidence was not a ghost story told by a flickering candle. It was a physical wound on the landscape, a moment frozen in the most transient of mediums. Snow is the great revealer of secrets, but it is also the ultimate eraser. And within days, the sun would erase the proof, leaving behind only the stories seared into human memory. Where the rational world demanded a natural culprit, the old world knew in its bones that the veil between the seen and the unseen had been torn. And so the labyrinth of theories began, a maze of educated guesses that only deepened the chill of the original anomaly. The simplest explanation proposed by the men of natural history was a mass migration of field mice, or rats, their tails dragging against the soft snow, mimicking the split of a hoof. You can almost conjure the image. A silent river of rodents flowing across the fields, an army of tiny shadows fleeing some unknown catastrophe in the frozen grass. Neither can a rat step unbroken over the peak of a high gable wall or walk across a hothouse roof without leaving a single scratch of a tiny claw on the glass underneath. Another voice from the science halls suggested a hopping creature. A kangaroo or a wallaby escaped from a private menagerie kept by some eccentric aristocrat. The mind tries to paint it. A lone, terrified marsupial leaping through the darkness, its powerful hind legs creating the single-file prints as it bounded over walls. But no such escape was ever reported in any county gazette, and a tropical beast stranded in that bitter -20-degree night would have frozen to death long before dawn. Some looked to the sky, weaving a theory of a balloon, trailing a rope with a horseshoe tied to its end, drifting with the wind, and tapping the snow like a pendulum. The image is almost whimsical, a great silent bladder of gas floating over the sleeping parishes, its dangling iron shoe bobbing precisely every 8 inches. Other naturalists looked at the structure of the snow itself, blaming the thaw and freeze cycle for expanding the tracks of ordinary animals into grotesque, otherworldly shapes. They argued that the prints of a badger or an otter, distorted by the morning sun, might have morphed into the hoof-like marks through a process of thermal decay. This is the cold voice of reason trying to build a dam against a flood, but it explains away only the shape, never the unnatural route that ignored the logic of terrain. In the desperation of the search, a darker hypothesis arose from the pulpit, branding the phenomenon a case of mass hysteria or deliberate hoaxing by the local populace. The clergy, seeing their flock return to pre-Christian dread, sometimes found it easier to accuse the shepherd of madness than to admit the wolf of the underworld was real. You can sense the strain in the archival ink. Men of authority trying desperately to define a wonder that had slipped clean out of the dictionary of the known world. They had no choice but to confront the void between the evidence of their eyes and the safety of their books, a space where the human mind chills itself like the winter wind. What do you call a footprint that is left by no body, that consumes no distance, and that wears no substance heavier than a shadow? The language of the Victorians failed them. They were grasping at the hem of a mystery that had no garment, no tangible thread for them to hold. We must now turn from the physical ground to the human heart. For the devil's footprints were more than a track. They were an intruder in the psyche of a generation. The story unfolded in the dying years of the Romantic era, where the devil was not a metaphor for social anxiety, but a stalking, breathing beast in the collective imagination. As the news spread, families who had lived in harmony with their neighbors suddenly looked at one another with suspicion, wondering whose hidden sin might have drawn the demon to their door. Parents kept their children locked inside long after the snow had melted, afraid that the cloven footprint was merely a herald of the walker's inevitable return. There is a deep human obsession with proof of the supernatural, a need to see that we are not merely accidents of chemistry, but characters in a larger battle between dark and light. These footprints did not offer spiritual comfort. They offered a terror that was weirdly affirming, a crack in the materialist ceiling through which a clawed foot had stepped. Expeditions of curious gentlemen from London traveled to the rural lanes of Devon, armed with the new contraption called a detective camera, hoping to trap the phantom on glass. But by the time they arrived, the spring thaw had dissolved the archives of the snow, and all they could photograph were the haunted faces of the witnesses. Historians would later comb through records, searching for a precedent, and they found whispers of a similar phenomenon in the Carpathian Mountains and in the vast white wastes of Antarctica. It is as if the entity, whatever it was, belonged to a genus of strangeness that touches down only in the extreme silences of the planet, leaving a fleeting, mocking signature. The human toll was subtle but lasting. Men became quieter in the taverns when the snow began to fall, and a new unit of dread was born in the parish of Dawlish. For the rest of their lives, those witnesses would look at a fresh snowfall not as a canvas of beauty, but as a silent alarm system, revealing that something had passed while they slept. The thing about the devil's footprints is that they mock the very structure of a scientific investigation. They offer a massive volume of data that points only to a logical zero. We have the stride, the shape, the span, the date, the testimonies. Yet the sum total of all these facts is a riddle that laughs at arithmetic. The physical world is a place of friction, weight, and causality. But these tracks seem to be drawn by a principle that had no observable mass and no need for leverage. They are a fingerprint left by the absence of a finger, a trail that begins nowhere bound for nothing, existing only to announce that the impossible was, for one night, patently real. You might stand on the green hills of Devon today, looking out at the gentle pastoral slopes, and wonder if the ghost of that geometry still lies dormant in the soil. The rivers have continued to flow, the stone walls have crumbled and been rebuilt, and the descendants of those witnesses still walk the lanes at twilight, knowing the story. The mystery has not been solved because the evidence relied on the temporary. Snow is the perfect metaphor for human memory, holding a perfect record before it dissolves into a chaotic, transparent puddle. And perhaps that is the cruelest trick of the unknown. It crystallized on a perishable canvas, ensuring that we would forever be left with the testimony of our ancestors and nothing else. We are left in a perpetual limbo of speculation, unable to prove the supernatural, yet far more frustrated, unable to prove the natural within the rigid bounds of physics. Every natural explanation requires us to ignore a single critical detail: the wall, the drain pipe, the river, the tightrope walk over the parish roof. To dismiss the anomaly is to betray the evidence. To accept the anomaly is to betray every principle of a rational universe that keeps our feet firmly on the ground. This is the moment in the labyrinth where the mind must choose its wound, either the torment of a broken logic or the chill of a demonic reality. The Devon footprints do not belong to the field of cryptozoology alone. They belong to the philosophy of the impossible, to the study of cracks in the grand narrative. They force us to ask a terrifying question about the nature of reality itself. Is the world stitched together with loopholes that a passing stranger might slip through? And if such a stranger can pass through a stone wall, leaving only a hoofprint in the snow, what else walks among us that leaves no print at all? Time, the great healer and the great eraser, has swallowed the physical truth of that winter night into its silent, glacial stomach. The eyewitnesses have long since returned to the dust, their frantic letters and sworn affidavits now yellowing in the boxes of the Devon Heritage Center. All we have is the shadow of a memory, the record of 100 miles of winter terrain that was scratched by a claw of profound and disturbing mystery. The Enfield monster and the beast of Gévaudan left bodies and blood. The devil of Devon left only geometry, a pure, abstract terror written in the language of measurement. We tell ourselves that time reveals all things, that the sheer wattage of modern science can burn the fog away from any ancient legend. Yet as you look upon the record of these footprints, that confidence wavers. Perhaps the most terrifying revelation of the footprints is not that the devil walked through Devon, but that our understanding of the physical universe is incomplete in a fundamental, frightening way. The silences of the past are like the dark spaces between street lamps. We presume there is nothing there simply because our light does not reach it. These tracks are a message from that interstellar darkness between our knowledge. A message that says, "You do not know the shape of the ground you walk on." The abyss stares back at us, not through a telescope, but from a humbler place, a snowdrift on the edge of a frozen English river where a 4-inch cloven hoof stepped out of nowhere. We have mapped the floor of the deep ocean and the surface of the desert, yet we cannot map the anatomy of a ghost that left a footprint in the temporary, melting page of winter. And so, the honest historian must set down the pen and admit that the devil's footprints remain exactly what they were on that February morning, a perfect, unbroken void. They are a frozen music of the absurd, a ballet of the impossible danced by a creature with no name over the thatched roofs of a sleeping civilization. The snow will fall again on the hills of Devon, blanketing the fields in that same virginal white, and a part of the local soul will always listen, in the deep stillness of the night, for the sound, not the howl of the wind or the groan of the ice, but the soft, deliberate rhythm of a walker who does not need doors, who leaves no history but a geometry of fear, and who has never been caught.